Excerpt from Meeting Mr. Barnum by Patricia Bear. This passage opens on the morning of March 12, 1888, after a night of heavy snow in most of the northeastern states. The snow and heavy winds continued that day and the next 2 days, culminating in the Great Blizzard of 1888, one of the most severe recorded blizzards in the history of the United States. In this historical fiction story, Josephine Gisolfi is a young immigrant who lives with her family in New York City's Lower East Side. The window glass was rattling angrily in its frame when Josephine Gisolfi woke. Mama's low voice floated to Josephine's ears on a draft of cold air. "I wouldn't have made Papa stay home if I'd known the storm would go on like this," she said in Italian to Josephine's older brother Angelo. "Must you go to work?" Josephine was out of bed and across the room in an instant. "But Mr. P.T. Barnum's circus is this afternoon." For as long as the ocean was wide, Josephine thought, that was how long she'd waited to see Mr. Barnum. "Go back to bed, Josephine, where you can stay warm," Mama said gently. "The circus will be canceled." Josephine stamped a foot on the freezing floorboards, ready to be every bit as stubborn as Mama, who had not let Papa come to America alone. "No, Mr. Barnum is not one to cancel anything." Mama fell silent at that. Finally she nodded. "Get dressed," she told Josephine. "It may not be possible for Angelo to come back for you this afternoon. Go with him now to his job." The wind prowled around the building like a live thing as Josephine walked down the stairs, bundled in nearly everything she owned, and Mama's shawl too. The stairway was dark like night. As Angelo opened the front door, a gust rushed in, stinging Josephine's face with cold. Snow swirled so thickly that the nearby elevated train trestles seemed to have vanished. Drifts hid the sidewalk and half the street. Angelo leaned down, as if to shout into Josephine's ear. Afraid he'd changed his mind about taking her to his job, she plowed down the steps and into the street. Behind her, she heard her name mix with the storm. Angelo's voice rising, falling, drifting. She paid it no heed as she trudged through snow that was past her knees. Soon her shoes and stockings were soaked through. To show Angelo how determined she was, she didn't even pause when she reached the iron stairway. Though her leather soles slipped this way and that on each ice-coated step, she gripped the freezing cold rail as tightly as she could and made her way to the top, to a station crowded with people. At the ticket booth, Josephine slid the 2 nickels Mama had spared through a hole in the grill. Tickets in hand, she joined Angelo beside a wooden tongue and groove wall. When the train gained some speed, slowed, then chugged forward again, Josephine was disappointed. The ride was not as exciting as she'd always imagined it would be. The elegant buildings and people she'd longed to see were hidden by the storm. As the train slid on past their station, Angelo's voice rang out in panic. "We must get off here." "They'll stop at the next station," the woman in the veil said kindly. But the train did not make it that far. At a curve, it slowed to a standstill. Angelo whispered to Josephine, "The wind is moving the train. It will blow us off the track." Josephine forced herself to stay calm. Though the train rocked, it didn't go down, or forward, or backward. It sat half an hour, 40 minutes. Josephine waited impatiently while ice spread across the glass. Though people around her complained, there was nothing they could do. Josephine's impatience turned to worry after an hour, when the windows were completely covered and the car was dark and cold. After 2 hours, worry became frustration. "I've had enough," she said. "I cannot miss the circus. I will not." At that moment, there was a pounding on the door, and someone called out, "Boys in the street have a ladder." Josephine followed half a dozen men off the train and into the storm. With Angelo trailing behind her, she crept along the railway ties, holding Mama's shawl close. A man pointed, "Find the ladder end, then climb on down." The wind made an eerie music, rushing past wires strung on tall poles. She forced herself to inch to the trestle's edge, as if doing a trick high up in some circus tent. She let her leg reach down. For one terrifying moment, she treaded empty air. Then her foot found the ladder. Stepping carefully, she made her way down. Angelo followed. In the storm, the 2 blocks to 4th Avenue and 24th Street felt like miles. But at last Josephine saw a poster cleared of ice, with the image of a large balding man with waves of hair as white as snow. Mr. P.T. Barnum himself. Madison Square Garden was the biggest building Josephine had ever seen. A smiling man with a droopy mustache showed her and Angelo where to go inside. He didn't check their tickets for seat numbers, but led them straight to the front row, where they had a perfect view of 3 rings surrounded by a track. It was announced that all 86 acts would appear that day. Nothing excited Josephine more, though, than the sight of a carriage rolling into the arena. When it stopped in the center ring, everything grew still. Josephine held her breath as an old stout man in a suit and vest stood up to speak in a voice that was strong and clear. "You came to see Barnum? Well, I'm Barnum. The storm may be a great show, but I still have the greatest show on earth." As the horse trotted out to the track, Josephine cheered so loudly that she hurt her throat. To her amazement, the carriage stopped directly in front of her. "Are you having a good time?" Mr. Barnum asked, leaning down to shake Angelo's and Josephine's hands. There she was, face to face with Mr. P.T. Barnum. If only she could speak. Angelo poked her hard in the ribs as the carriage pulled away to deposit Mr. Barnum in his special box seat. "Think what we went through," he jeered, "and you say nothing?" Josephine leaned back and tried to forget her shame as the circus continued. Her gaze kept shifting to Mr. Barnum, though. He roared with delight and seemed to enjoy everything as much as if it were his first time at the circus, too. At the end of the show, Papa was outside, waiting to see Josephine and Angelo home. He was glad to find them safe and brought good news from Angelo's boss, who had promised Angelo would not lose his job. But Papa was annoyed, too. He couldn't believe they'd risk their lives to see a circus. "I tried to make her go home," Angelo said. "She wouldn't listen to me." When Josephine made no reply, Papa shook his head. "Only you and Mr. Barnum would think to go out on a day like today, Josephine. Only you and Mr. Barnum."